firm to the attorney's office. So the attorney has all the funds to process closing. Everybody with me so far? This is only refer. If the attorney has the money, then it's already there and we don't have anything to do. If it's with the firm, though, there's a couple rules, couple things that come out. One of the commission rules says that the firm cannot send that earnest money deposit to the closing attorney no earlier than 10 business days prior to settlement. So if you have closing in 2 weeks, you got to wait 4 more days before you get it to the attorney. The attorney's probably going to request it closer to settlement. But again, that's a conversation for you to have with the attorney about when they want it. Just know the commission rule says you can't take it there any earlier than 10 days prior to settlement. And there's one of two ways that we can get that earnest money deposit from the real estate firm to the closing attorney. So the first way is we're going from the firm to the attorney. The first way we can get it there, let's just call this the old school way of doing things, the way that we used to do things. The firm wrote a check, the broker took the check to the attorney cashed it, and the funds were there. People had to touch this check. The firm had to cut it, the agent had to deliver it, the attorney has to deposit. Presumably the funds are good. We need to know that before we can close. This is the old school way of doing things, and it's more risky because so many people have to touch it. You guys know, the fewer people that touch money, the better. So when you get a bunch of hands on it, things happen, right? So some firms may still do this. I think this is the older way of doing things. I think it's more risky and we're not seeing it anymore. The other way, the modern way that we're seeing today, nobody's touching money. Instead of taking it to the closing attorney, the firm is keeping the earnest money deposit in their trust account. The attorney is deducting that amount from the firm's commission. I'll get you your full commission, don't worry. I'll run a scenario in just a second. So instead of money actually going to the attorney, the firm just keeps it and they deduct that amount from their commission. So when you, the broker, go pick up your commission, let's say, for example, your commission, I'm just going to make numbers up, is $3,000. This is our commission. When you go pick up your check, if our earnest money deposit is $1,000, the amount of your check is going to be for $2,000. So after closing, you go to the attorney's office to get your money or your firm's money, and you're not going to get your full commission check. You're going to get the commission minus the earnest money deposit. You take that check for $2,000 back to your firm. Your firm transfers $1,000 from the trust account to their operating account. They take that $1,000 from the trust account to their operating account to make them whole. They've gotten their full commission, right? But we haven't had to touch money. Money never had to leave the building. We were able to keep that earnest money there. Do you guys remember earlier when I said we're going to look at our highly recommended homework assignment tomorrow because there's some funny things in there? This is a scenario we're going to see. We're going to see this again tomorrow, which means we'll talk about it again tomorrow. But we're going to see how a situation like this would play out on the closing disclosure. So we'll see this again tomorrow. Do you have any questions just on the idea? Do we see how it's better? It's less risky. You don't have a bunch of people touching it and driving it down the road. I mean, what if that broker gets in an accident and their car's totaled, right? You know, we got to reissue that check. I mean, you know, it's less risky the fewer people that have to touch it. So we're looking at just deducting it from the commission and then letting the firm transfer it from the trust account to the operating account after closing. So more on that tomorrow. Couple funny things to look at, and that's one of them. All right, title insurance. We have danced all around this, but here we are. Title insurance. If a lender's involved, title insurance is required, period, end of story. If it's a cash buyer, title insurance is highly recommended. The lender requires title insurance to protect the buyer's interest, but they also do it to protect their interest. The lender has an interest in this property. What was our earlier problem? I don't remember the exact amount, but it was like right at $250,000 for the sales price, right? 249, 650, something like that. Let's just say 250. Their loan amount was $212,000. You guys understand that loan amount is the lender's interest. Who has the bigger interest in this property right now? It's the one that has $212,000 sunk into it. Does that make sense? So the lender's got to protect their $212,000. And they do so one way by requiring title insurance. Title insurance is meant to cover errors of the past. Title insurance will protect the current owner from anything that hits the title before they owned it. So remember that mechanics lien that didn't get filed until after closing? That's why you have title insurance. Like we said earlier, though, the buyer still has to do their part. If they waive the survey and then an encroachment is later discovered, title insurance will probably say, I'm not touching that. Had you had the survey done prior to settlement, you would have taken care of it and we wouldn't be here now. So title insurance, errors of the past, it's a one-time fee. It's not like it needs to be renewed year after year after year. It's a one-time fee that we now know the buyer pays at closing. It protects the buyer for as long as they own the property. It protects the lender for as long as there's an outstanding balance. Once you pay off that $212,000 with interest, the lender's out. They don't have an interest anymore. And so their policy would fall off. Questions or comments about title insurance? Buyer's agents. As we get closer and closer to closing, we need to let our buyer know how much they need to bring to closing. We'll go through the process. We'll get there tomorrow night, I think. But we'll go through the process. Our responsibility with the closing disclosure, as we've said, it is our responsibility to review these things for accuracy. And when you find a mistake, not if, but when you find a mistake, we owe it to our buyers to report it to the attorney and or the lender. We have a duty to make sure that these things are completed accurately and that our buyers are bringing the proper amounts to settlement. We may be telling our buyers how much they bring to settlement the day before, 2 days before, it might be close. They've seen their final CD from the lender. Again, we'll talk about that tomorrow. But what we get from the attorney is like the final CD. And that's the one that we're reviewing. That's the one that we're verifying. Tell your buyers, and I've even had lenders tell the buyers, don't go to the bank until you talk to me, because I'm the one that reviews the final. I'm the one that calls my buyer and says, to the penny, this is how much you need to bring to closing tomorrow. The buyer's got to bring readily available funds. It's got to be a wire transfer, cashier's check, money order, whatever they bring may be up to the attorney. The attorney may request, I know like some attorneys will say any amount over 25,000 has to be a wire transfer, for example. So if you've not worked with the attorney, if you're not familiar with the attorney, just call them and say, how do you want my buyer to bring their closing check tomorrow? We can't have a personal check, because if we got a personal check, now we got to wait for that thing to clear. Nobody wants to wait 5 to 10 days for that thing to clear the bank, right? So readily available funds, so we know we have the cash in our hand. And no, they can't bring a big bag of cash and plop it on a closing attorney's table and say, here you go. It's got to be a cashier's check, wire transfer, some kind of something official. Imagine a pillowcase full of money or something. Here you go. It doesn't work that way. So settlement. The biggest part, as I've mentioned, the biggest part is the contract to closing process. The lender communicates with the attorney close to time. The lender communicates with the attorney and tells the attorney how they want their loan package handled, how they want it processed, signed, all that good stuff. The attorney is doing this on behalf of the lender. Once the lender sends the loan package to the attorney, buyer comes into settlement, signs the loan package, then the attorney sends it back to the lender to make sure that it's the final approval. Make sure everything's signed, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, everything's dated. When the lender approves the signed loan package, that is when they release the loan amount. They're not going to send that $212,000 until they have verified that their loan package is complete and signed. So that's part of what the attorney's doing in the closing process. They're finalizing that loan process, getting them the final paperwork, and then receiving the funds, the readily available funds, usually wire transfer from the lender. Look, here it is again. So we have a duty to review this closing disclosure for accuracy. We're going to talk, I know we've done a closing disclosure, but we're actually to talk about it tomorrow night as well, because there's some fun TRID laws that we get into, that kind of thing. So we're going to spend some more time talking about the closing disclosure tomorrow as well. The last little piece in this section is to talk about, there's a couple different closing methods. The first type of closing method we do not do in North Carolina. The first type of closing method is referred to as the escrow closing method. Escrow closing method states don't use closing attorneys. They use title insurance companies. Title insurance companies handle the transfer of the title. Parties don't have to attend anything. They just got to send their stuff in and let the title insurance company process it. They have something called a relation back doctrine, just says the seller's deed is considered delivered when they take it to the title insurance company. So once the title insurance company receives it, the seller's deed has been delivered. Why is this important to us if we don't do it in North Carolina? Well, I'll tell you. North Carolina is one of very few states in this country that does our closing attorney method. We'll see that next. I've heard like 6 or 7 states do it our way, which means the majority of the country uses the escrow closing method. It's not unlikely that at some point in your career, you're going to have a buyer move here from another state that is familiar with how they did it back in their state. And they may even look at you and say, do I have to hire an attorney? Are you kidding me? And our answer is, if you're purchasing a property in the state of North Carolina, yes, you have to hire an attorney, because North Carolina is a settlement meeting method state. North Carolina uses a settlement agent that you and I refer to as the closing attorney. So make sure, again, especially if you have buyers from other states that are familiar with the process, they're going to have to hire an attorney. They're going to have less involvement with the title insurance company and a lot more involvement. The attorney's also acting on behalf of the title insurance company, making sure the title's clear, making sure that that title insurance company can release their policy. Because in North Carolina, we use closing attorneys, settlement agents, we also may have roles of non-lawyers in the transaction. A non-lawyer might be your paralegal. If you guys have been to settlement, you may have discovered that you spend more time talking to the paralegal than you do the actual closing attorney. I know in many cases, I didn't even meet the closing attorney until we were sitting down at the table. Everything I did prior to that was a paralegal. And it's important that we understand that the paralegal has a very important role as well on things that they can do. We're going to look at what they can't do in just a second. The closing attorney doesn't necessarily have to come to settlement. The closing attorney can send their paralegal. The paralegal can point and say, sign here, date here, initial here. The paralegal is perfectly capable of doing that as long as they are not the ones that drafted those legal documents. The paralegal kind of sounds familiar, right? We also are non-lawyers. And a big part of our responsibility is to not draft legally binding documents. Now, again, it's been my experience. I've never had a paralegal conduct settlement, but it could happen. I've always been fortunate enough to have the closing attorney. Sometimes questions come up. If it's a legal question, the paralegal just can't answer it because they're not an active member of the North Carolina Bar Association. So they can present and identify, they can show everybody where to sign, they can make sure everything has been signed. They can receive and disperse the closing funds. They can take the money from the buyer and deposit it. Once it's closed, they can sit down and write the checks to pay the seller, you and me, the home inspector, the pest inspector, you know, all those people at closing with their hand out, waiting to get paid. They can write the checks to pay those people. Their big thing is they cannot practice law because they are non-lawyers. They can't offer an opinion of title. They can't explain anything legal. They can't draft. Again, it sounds really familiar to me and you, doesn't it? It kind of looks like our list right now. So, you know, it's funny, we often joke, it's not about always about forming a relationship with the closing attorney. Sometimes it's about forming a relationship with a paralegal because that's the one that we're communicating. For the most part, I'm not saying you never talk to an attorney, but the paralegal is very involved. They get often they work, do what they can for and on behalf of the attorney. So one more thing about settlement meeting, or two more things about settlement meeting. First off, who attends settlement? We almost always need the buyers there. In extreme circumstances, they may allow for a mail away closing, but that's going to have to be with permission of the lender and the attorney. And it's going to have to be an extreme circumstance. You know, I want to go on vacation this week, probably would not be an extreme circumstance. Active military that gets deployed might be an extreme circumstance. You guys with me? So this would be like, you know, like a last ditch effort. Otherwise, and again, I need the lender and the attorney's approval to do this. Otherwise, the buyers are going to be at settlement. Buyers agents, we need to be there with our buyers. We need to make sure if they have any questions, we're there to help them answer. If nothing else, we're the comforting face that has been with them since day one. So let's finish this thing through with them. Let's celebrate through with them because we've all been through a process together, haven't we? So let's make sure that we're all happy on the other end. Sellers may or may not attend settlement. Sellers have two choices. They either come to settlement and sign, or they sign prior to settlement in front of a notary and then send their documents to the closing attorney. It's up to the seller. Listing agents, we need to deliver the documents, the key, the access to the property. We need to make sure that the attorney has all of that and be available. Everybody needs to be available on settlement day to make sure everything's going as smoothly as possible. The location where we have settlement doesn't matter. most of the time it could happen in the closing attorney's office. I've done settlement in the conference room at the real estate firm. There used to be an attorney in Greensboro that worked out of her home. Even before COVID, she had a home office. So settlement was like at her dining room table, right? The location doesn't matter, just wherever we can get the buyer and the attorney, their paralegal to review everything. What questions do we have? We just went from contract to closing in like a whirlwind. It's a process. It's a process. I'm a big fan of checklists. Those of you affiliated, your firms may have checklists. If not, then you may want to, team up with some people in your office and come up with some checklists, because we want to make sure we're doing the same thing for every buyer, every transaction. We want to make sure we're doing everything for every buyer, every transaction. CD for homework, we're going to talk about that tomorrow. We're going to talk about that tomorrow because we got some funny things to talk about that our brains are kind of mushy. So we'll do that tomorrow. Anything else? Y'all ready to boogie? You guys have a good night. We'll same place, same time tomorrow. And we'll be halfway done after tomorrow. How about that? That's the fun thing about Coast. Clickety click. So y'all have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.